We start out with the black emptiness of space. Suddenly, a spontaneous explosion occurred known as the Big Bang. This introduced dust that eventually formed rocks floating aimlessly through space. After billions of years, multiple pieces of rock would come together to eventually form enormous planets, one of which became our home, Earth. Earth was ever-changing, developing new features, and eventually became multiple pieces of land separated by vast bodies of water. If we take a closer look, the surface of the Earth began to see an entirely new occurrence: life. The first life was extremely small, simple, and known as a prokaryotic organism. There are 8 essential characteristics of these organisms. All living things have genetic material, they grow and develop, have organization, reproduce, respond to stimuli, have a metabolism, adapt to the environment, and maintain homeostasis. After some time, the prokaryotes began to need food, and some forms of the prokaryotes resulted to ingesting others, creating the eukaryote. This process is called endosymbiosis, and the original cell becomes more complex with multiple organelles by engulfing a smaller prokaryote and their genetic material. As we can see, each of the organelles inside of a cell look different and perform specialized functions. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is located near the center of the cell, and it houses ribosomes that make proteins for the cell. Other ribosomes are also located in a jelly-like substance that suspends all organelles called the cytoplasm. Also in the cytoplasm, there are Golgi bodies that process the proteins coming from the ribosomes for use throughout the cell. Another essential structure in the cell is the mitochondria, which perform cellular respiration, keeping animals alive. A vacuole is where the cell stores water, but are only prominent in plant cells. The lysosome breaks down waste materials and cellular debris. They can also be described as the stomach of the cell. The control center, or brain, of the cell is called the nucleus, and this stores the genetic information identical to all other cells in the organism. One essential process that happens in the cell is called DNA replication. In this, helicase first unravels the DNA. Next, DNA polymerase will attach on both sides of the DNA strand and race down, copying the DNA by attaching corresponding nitrogenous bases. This process creates 2 separate identical strands in preparation for cell replication. When the DNA is being copied, there are 3 main mutations that can occur. The first is known as insertion, and this is when 1 or more nitrogenous bases are added into the sequence. A second is substitution. This is when 1 or more of the bases are switched for different ones. The third mutation is called deletion. This is when a series of bases is deleted from the DNA sequence. Another important process that starts in the nucleus is protein synthesis. The first part, which occurs in the nucleus, is called transcription. In this, DNA is copied to make a complementary strand of mRNA. Next, RNA processing identifies parts of the strand as either introns or exons, and the introns are removed before leaving the nucleus. Translation then occurs in the ribosomes of the cell, and in this, tRNA anticodons match with the mRNA codons to form an amino acid chain, eventually creating a protein for the cell to use. Now that the cells have replicated, they can begin to form larger and more complex structures. When a large number of cells group together, they work to form a tissue. When multiple tissues work together, an organ is formed. Several organs will work together to help perform a function essential to life, and this creates an organ system. Finally, many organ systems working together make up a functioning organism. Within these highly developed organisms, there are 4 macromolecules that help keep them alive. The first are called carbohydrates, which are sugars made of monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides, and they give us energy and structure. The next are lipids, which consist of 1 glycerol head and 3 fatty acid tails. A subgroup, phospholipids, make up the cell membranes, and they can be saturated or unsaturated. A third macromolecule is proteins. These are made of amino acids and an R group, which is the differentiating factor, and these contribute to the makeup of our bodies. Lastly, there are nucleic acids, which are essentially DNA and RNA. They contain a sugar phosphate backbone and nitrogenous bases that can be adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine, or uracil. Uracil is only an RNA and substitutes for thymine. Each of these macromolecules are used in different ways in each of the body systems. One is the nervous system. This includes the brain, spinal cord, and nerves that control the body. Another is the integumentary system, which includes skin, hair, and nails. and protects the internal organs and helps regulate temperature. The respiratory system includes the lungs, trachea, and bronchi, and brings oxygen into the body while removing carbon dioxide. The mouth, stomach, and intestines are part of the digestive system, which breaks down food and absorbs the nutrients. The skeletal system includes the bones and provides blood cell production, calcium storage, and structure for the body. The muscular system sometimes works with the bones and includes muscles, ligaments, and cartilage, and helps with movement. Another system is the circulatory system, which includes the heart and blood vessels, and distributes oxygen to the heart and body. The endocrine system includes the pancreas and is the long-distance messenger using hormones that are held in the glands. Finally, the reproductive system includes ovaries and testes and allows reproduction for new offspring.
One major function the reproductive system performs is meiosis. This is the process where a cell duplicates to create 4 haploid cells, or sex cells. The cycle begins with the process identical to mitosis, creating 2 diploid cells. These cells will then go through the same process, except there is only one set of the chromosome left in the final 4 cells.
This process, however, only occurs in animals. Plants have entirely different structures for reproduction. In primary stages of a plant, the sepal protects the developing flower. After a plant matures, the petals are the colorful advertising part, attracting pollinators. The stamen is the male reproductive system that consists of the filament and anther that produces pollen. Meanwhile, the pistil is the female reproductive structure that contains stigma, style, and ovary, where the pollen fertilizes the seed in the ovule. Along with reproduction, plants need to stay alive, and they do this through photosynthesis. This is the process in which a plant creates glucose and oxygen through water, carbon dioxide, and light, and this occurs in the chloroplast of plant cells. The formula is 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus light equals C6H12O6 plus 6O2. Animals, on the other hand, perform cellular respiration. This is essentially the opposite of photosynthesis and occurs in the mitochondria of animal cells. In this, an animal creates water, carbon dioxide, and ATP from glucose and oxygen, and the formula is C6H12O6 plus 6O2 equals 6CO2 plus 6H2O. Even though different organisms work together in order to survive, they must also find food. When one organism consumes another, it gains 10% of the energy that the organism contained. This is known as the 10% rule. A food chain is another way to analyze the passing of energy from one organism to the next. These show the order in which organisms consume each other, and the arrows represent energy being passed from prey to predator. In all ecosystems, there are several food chains that interact, creating a food web. Within any food chain, there are levels at which each producer or consumer lies. These are known as trophic levels. The first level is known as the producer, which is an autotroph, creating its own food from energy from the sun. The second trophic level is a primary consumer, which gets energy from eating producers. The third level is a secondary consumer and feeds on organisms in the second trophic level. The fourth and final trophic level is at the top of the food chain and gets its energy from secondary consumers. All of this interaction occurs within one level of Earth's organization. The scale of each grouping of organisms is commonly represented by the acronym BBECPO. Biosphere is the largest and includes all of the places where life is located on our Earth. Biomes are smaller areas of similar climate around the world. Within biomes, there are ecosystems, which are just communities with their surrounding abiotic factors. Communities are multiple populations in a region, and populations are all organisms of a species in a region. Finally, the smallest level, an organism, which we learned earlier, was an individual being. These seemingly harmonious environments are not always peaceful. Often in a region, natural disasters will occur, destroying much, if not all, of the environment, thus forcing the region to undergo the process called succession. This is the process in which the environment needs to regrow and bring back life that was lost in a sudden event. Primary succession happens when there is nothing left but bare rock, while secondary occurs when there is still a little soil left in the area. Both, however, work through various stages to reach an ideal climax community. Now that we've taken a look at Earth on many scales, from the size of DNA to the biosphere as a whole, we can see that there is a lot more than meets the eye. Since the beginning, billions of years ago, we have evolved to become extremely complex through phenomenons that show how incredible the Earth really is.